February 20th, 1943. A Sherman tank sat disabled in the Tunisian sand near Kasserine Pass, its left track blown apart by a direct hit from an 88mm gun. The crew had abandoned it hours earlier, retreating with what remained of the scattered American forces. German infantry approached cautiously, weapons raised, circling the motionless vehicle. The tank was empty. Within minutes, a signals team arrived. Recovery teams followed. Orders came down from Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself. Get this tank, send it to Germany, whatever it takes. The Americans had been in Tunisia for barely 3 months. They'd come confident, well-equipped, certain of their training and their machines. Rommel's Afrika Korps had shattered that confidence in less than a week. At Sidi Bouzid, at Sbaitla, through Kasserine Pass itself, German panzers had torn through American positions with methodical brutality. The Americans lost over 1,600 men in the first 2 days, nearly 100 tanks, 57 half-tracks, 29 artillery pieces. They retreated 50 miles, leaving behind most of their equipment. Rommel's subordinates were contemptuous. Hitler's predictions about American fighting ability seemed confirmed. Sloppy tactics, poor coordination, inexperienced leadership. The Desert Fox himself, watching from his command vehicle, saw something different. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. He saw the equipment. The Americans had come to fight with tanks Rommel had never encountered, not the obsolete M3 Lees with their awkward hull-mounted guns. These were M4 Shermans, medium tanks with proper turrets, gyro-stabilized 75mm guns, and armor that sloped just enough to be interesting. More troubling was the sheer number of them. German intelligence had counted over 300 Allied tanks in Tunisia before the battle. After Kasserine, despite German victories, the Allies still had tanks. Always more tanks. Rommel stood beside the captured Sherman as his recovery team prepared it for transport. His uniform hung loose on his frame. The jaundice had cost him £15. Stomach ailments, probably amoebic dysentery, plagued him constantly. His staff urged him to return to Germany for treatment. He'd refused. There was work to do. He walked around the Sherman slowly, running his hand along the hull. The tank was massive, taller than a Panzer III, broader than a Panzer IV. Its frontal armor looked ordinary enough, 51mm according to the white stenciling the Germans had painted on for testing. But it was sloped. Not dramatically, like the Soviet T-34's radical angles, but sloped enough to increase effective thickness significantly. He opened the driver's hatch and looked inside. Spacious, well laid out. The driver's seat looked comfortable, ergonomic. The controls were clearly labeled, even in the dark interior. The transmission, visible through an access plate, was housed in a robust-looking casing. This wasn't improvised engineering. This was industrial design, optimized for mass production and ease of maintenance. Lieutenant Colonel von Mellenthin, his chief intelligence officer, approached with a folder. Inside were documents captured from the retreating Americans. Maintenance manuals, supply requisitions, training materials, production schedules. Rommel read in silence. Then he read again. According to American documents, the United States had produced over 2,000 medium tanks in 1942 alone. The British had received hundreds. The Soviets had received more. The Americans had kept thousands for their own forces, and production was accelerating. The Chrysler tank arsenal near Detroit could produce 750 tanks per month from a single facility. 750 per month. From one factory. Germany had 11 facilities producing tanks. In 1942, they'd managed approximately 245 panzers per month, total. The Americans were outproducing the entire German armaments industry from a single converted automobile factory. Von Mellenthin waited. Rommel looked up from the documents, then back at the Sherman. "Herr Feldmarschall," he began, "the Americans fight poorly. Their tactics are primitive. Their commanders are hesitant. We defeated them here decisively." Rommel nodded slowly. "And tomorrow?" Von Mellenthin hesitated. "Tomorrow we will defeat them again. If they return." "They will return," Rommel said quietly. "And they will have more tanks than we destroyed today. And the day after that, more tanks still." He gestured at the Sherman. "This tank is adequate. Not excellent, adequate. It has decent armor, a competent gun, good mechanical reliability. The Americans don't need excellent tanks. They need thousands of adequate tanks. And, apparently, they have them." The recovery team loaded the Sherman onto a flatbed railcar. They covered it with tarpaulins, assigned an armed guard, and sent it west. The train rolled through Libya, across the Mediterranean by ship to Italy, then north through the Alps into Germany, to Kummersdorf proving ground south of Berlin. The same facility where, 18 months earlier, German engineers had examined a captured T-34 and realized the Soviets had built a tank that outclassed everything Germany fielded. Now they would examine an American tank and discover something far more terrifying than superior engineering. At Kummersdorf, Wehrmacht engineers from the Waffenprüfung, the weapons testing office, gathered in the hangar. They'd examined captured British tanks, French tanks, Soviet tanks. They understood armored vehicle design as well as anyone alive. They'd designed the Panzer III and IV, conceived the Tiger and Panther programs. They knew tanks. The chief engineer, Hauptmann Ernst Petsch, walked around the Sherman with a measuring tape and notebook. He was young for his position, 32, educated at the Technical University of Berlin. He'd spent the last 3 years testing enemy equipment, trying to identify weaknesses, understand advantages, recommend improvements to German designs. The Sherman looked crude to his trained eye. The welding was rough, visible seams showing hasty assembly. The armor casting had surface imperfections. The paint was applied quickly, without the careful preparation German factories insisted upon. By German manufacturing standards, this tank was unacceptable. It looked like it had been built fast. Because it had been. Petsch measured the frontal armor, 51 millimeters at 56 degrees from vertical. He calculated effective thickness. Against a horizontal shot, that 51 millimeters became approximately 77 millimeters. Not exceptional, but adequate against most German tank guns at combat ranges. The sides were thinner, 38 millimeters, vulnerable but acceptable for a medium tank. He examined the turret. Cast armor, well-shaped with a mantlet protecting the gun. The turret could traverse 360 degrees, powered by hydraulics. German tankers still relied on manual traverse on many vehicles. American crews could aim faster, react to threats more quickly. Inside, the tank was surprisingly spacious. 5 crew stations. Commander in the rear of the turret with an excellent view through his periscope and overhead hatch. Gunner below and forward with a telescope sight that looked well designed. Loader to the left with access to ammunition stored throughout the fighting compartment. Driver and assistant driver in the hull with their own periscopes and escape hatches. The crew comfort was remarkable. German tanks were cramped, claustrophobic, designed for efficiency over ergonomics. The Sherman felt roomy. Crew positions had padding. The seats were adjustable. There was storage space for personal items, brackets for crew weapons, ventilation that actually worked. This was a tank designed by people who understood that crews performed better when they weren't constantly uncomfortable. Oberleutnant Hans Decker, Petsch's assistant, was examining the engine compartment. "Sir, you should see this." Petsch joined him at the rear of the tank. They'd removed the engine deck plates, exposing the power plant beneath. It was massive. A Continental R975 radial aircraft engine, adapted for armored vehicle use. 9 cylinders arranged in a star pattern, air-cooled, producing 400 horsepower. Decker pointed at the mounting system. Look at this design. The entire engine assembly is mounted on a subframe. You could pull this complete power plant in a field workshop with basic equipment. He ran his hand along the fuel lines, the cooling system. Everything is accessible. Nothing requires special tools or factory facilities. Peitsch understood the implications immediately. German tank engines were sophisticated, powerful, precisely engineered. They were also difficult to maintain. A Maybach HL210 engine required trained mechanics, specialized tools, often factory-level facilities for major repairs. This American engine was crude by comparison, an aircraft engine adapted for ground use, but it was simple, maintainable. A crew with wrenches and determination could replace this engine themselves. He checked the fuel system. Gasoline. German practice, familiar technology. But the tanks were placed low in the hull, relatively protected. Fire suppression systems were installed. The Americans had learned the lesson every tank designer eventually learned. Fuel fires killed crews. They spent 2 days examining every system. The transmission was manually shifted, required significant driver strength, prone to failure under hard use. German tankers would have complained bitterly. The vision devices were adequate but not exceptional. The gun, a 75mm M3, had good ballistics but unremarkable penetration. The ammunition storage was initially poorly arranged, rounds scattered throughout the crew compartment, a fire hazard. Later models, according to captured documents, had improved wet stowage systems. None of that mattered. What mattered was that this tank could be built quickly, maintained easily, operated by partially trained crews, and produced in quantities that made individual deficiencies irrelevant. Peitsch compiled his findings into a report. He wrote carefully, choosing words that would convey reality without sounding defeated. The M4 Sherman represents a fundamentally different design philosophy than German armored vehicles. It prioritizes production efficiency, operational reliability, and ease of maintenance over technical sophistication. Specifications: weight 33 tons, length with gun 24 feet 8 inches, width 8 feet 7 inches, armor 51mm frontal, 38mm sides, main armament 75mm M3 gun. Secondary armament is 1 coaxial 30 caliber machine gun, 1 hull-mounted 30 caliber machine gun, 1 50 caliber machine gun on turret. Engine Continental R975, 400 horsepower. Maximum speed 26 miles per hour. Range approximately 100 miles. Combat assessment. The Sherman's armor is vulnerable to German 75mm long-barreled guns at normal combat ranges. The Panzer IV with the KWK-40 can penetrate Sherman frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The 88mm gun can penetrate at any combat range. The Sherman's own gun can penetrate Panzer IV frontal armor at ranges under 800 meters, depending on angle. He paused, pen hovering over paper, then wrote the paragraph that mattered. Strategic assessment. The critical factor is not the Sherman's technical capabilities, which are adequate but unexceptional. The critical factor is American production capacity. Based on captured documents and intelligence estimates, the United States is producing medium tanks at a rate of approximately 2,000 per month across multiple facilities. This exceeds total German tank production by a factor of 8 to 1. He continued, "The Sherman is designed for mass production using automobile industry techniques. Construction time per vehicle is estimated at half that required for a Panzer IV. Manufacturing complexity is deliberately reduced. Interchangeable parts allow rapid repair. The American production system can replace battlefield losses faster than they occur." Conclusion: German forces face an enemy with effectively unlimited material resources. Superior German tactical performance and vehicle quality can achieve local victories, but the strategic mathematics are unsustainable. The Americans can lose 4 Shermans for every German tank destroyed and still increase their net armored strength. He stared at the words, then signed the report and sent it to Berlin. The Wehrmacht High Command received the report on March 12, 1943. They read it. They filed it with similar assessments about Soviet production capacity, British industrial mobilization, American aircraft manufacturing. The strategic situation was clear. Germany was fighting enemies who could outproduce them by orders of magnitude. There was nothing to be done about it. Germany couldn't match American industrial capacity. The Ruhr Valley wasn't Detroit. German factories couldn't adopt assembly line techniques designed for automobile production because German industry wasn't organized that way. The entire German economic system was structured differently, prioritized different values, operated under different constraints, so they kept building panzers. Sophisticated, expensive, difficult to maintain panzers. Tigers with 100mm armor and 88mm guns, each one a masterpiece of engineering, each one requiring months to build. Panthers with sloped armor copied from the T-34. Powerful 75mm guns, excellent vehicles that cost twice as much and took twice as long to produce as a Sherman. In 1943, Germany would produce approximately 6,000 tanks. The United States would produce 29,000. The disparity was catastrophic. Rommel never saw Pietsch's report. By the time it reached Berlin, he'd already been recalled to Germany for medical treatment. But he didn't need the report. He'd understood the moment he saw those captured American supply dumps at Kasserine Pass. In the days after the battle, German forces had overrun American supply positions. What they found shocked even veteran Afrika Korps soldiers who'd spent 2 years scrounging supplies in the desert. The Americans had mountains of equipment, crates of rations, far superior to German field provisions. Medical supplies in abundance, spare parts for every vehicle, ammunition stacked so high it required forklifts to move it. One German officer wrote in his diary, "We found more food in a single American supply dump than our entire division receives in a month. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, canned meat, fresh vegetables in refrigerated trucks. The Americans eat better in combat than we eat in garrison. They have portable shower units, laundry facilities, recreation equipment. It's obscene." But what disturbed Rommel wasn't the luxury items. It was the basics. The Americans had spare barrels for their tank guns, replacement engines, complete transmissions, radio sets by the dozen. They had so many spare parts that they could afford to destroy equipment rather than let it be captured. German forces were cannibalizing destroyed tanks for parts. American forces were burning perfectly serviceable equipment because they didn't want to bother hauling it back. The wealth of material represented a military philosophy Rommel had never encountered. The Americans weren't trying to maintain equipment longer, repair faster, conserve resources. They were planning to replace everything. Tanks, trucks, weapons. They assumed nothing would last. They assumed everything could be replaced. They assumed unlimited supply, and they were right. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Back in Germany, recovering from his illness, Rommel met with Wehrmacht officers responsible for armaments production. He asked about German tank output. They gave him the numbers. He asked about American tank output. They gave him intelligence estimates. He sat in silence, doing mathematics in his head. A general oberst in armaments production tried to be encouraging. "Herr Feldmarschall, the American tanks are inferior. A Panzer IV can defeat a Sherman at range. A Tiger can destroy 3, 4, 5 Shermans before they can respond. Our tank crews are better trained, our tactics superior. Quality will defeat quantity." Rommel shook his head. The Americans don't need to defeat our panzers individually. They need to defeat Germany strategically. And they can do that through simple arithmetic. He pulled out a paper, began writing numbers. Germany produces approximately 6,000 tanks annually. The Americans produce 30,000. The ratio is 5-1. In tank combat, if we maintain a 4-1 kill ratio, we lose. If we maintain a 5-1 kill ratio, we break even. We must achieve 6-1, 7-1, 8-1 consistently across every theatre just to slow their advance. He looked up. That's not a military problem. That's a mathematical impossibility. We can't be that much better than them forever. Eventually, they'll learn our tactics, improve their training, upgun their tanks. And when they do, the arithmetic becomes catastrophic. The armaments officer had no response. What could he say? Rommel was right. Everyone knew Rommel was right. Germany had superior engineering, better trained crews, more experienced commanders. None of it mattered against an enemy who could replace losses 10 times faster than Germany could inflict them. In May 1943, Rommel was appointed Inspector of Coastal Defences for Western Europe. He toured the Atlantic Wall, examined fortifications, assessed troop readiness. He knew the invasion was coming. The question was when and where. His job was to make sure Germany was ready. He wasn't optimistic. Walking along a beach in Normandy, he turned to his aide, Hauptmann Helmuth Lang. The Americans and British will come with more equipment than we can imagine. More tanks, more trucks, more artillery, more supplies than any army in history has ever assembled. They will establish a beachhead. They will land supplies faster than we can interdict them. And then they will advance with the slow, grinding inevitability of a machine that cannot be stopped because it has infinite replacement parts. Lang ventured a response. But our defenders are prepared. The Atlantic Wall is strong. We have obstacles, mines, artillery covering the beaches. We can throw them back into the sea. Rommel smiled, a grim expression. Perhaps. If they attack where we are, expect when we expect with the forces we've planned for. But they won't. They'll attack with 10 times the force we've prepared for, and what we destroy, they'll replace overnight. He was proven right on June 6, 1944. Operation Overlord hit the Normandy beaches with overwhelming force. 156,000 troops in the first day, 2,000 aircraft in constant support, 5,000 ships off the coast. The logistics were beyond anything military history had seen. German defenders fought with characteristic determination. They inflicted terrible casualties on Omaha Beach, destroyed dozens of Allied tanks, held defensive positions against impossible odds. It didn't matter. The Allies landed more troops, more tanks, more supplies. When a German position destroyed 5 Shermans, 10 more appeared the next morning. When German artillery sank supply ships, more ships arrived that afternoon. Rommel observed the battle from his headquarters, watching intelligence reports flow in. He tracked German losses. 8 panzers destroyed today. 3 more damaged beyond field repair. Intelligence estimates of Allied losses. 40 tanks destroyed, approximately 70 damaged. He did the arithmetic. German tank production couldn't replace 8 panzers daily. American production could replace 40 Shermans before breakfast and never notice the loss. One evening, he spoke with his chief of staff about the strategic situation. They're building a new tank. The Americans. Intelligence has photographs. The T-26, they call it. Heavier armor than the Sherman, 90mm gun, designed to counter Tigers and Panthers. It won't enter production until next year, but when it does, they'll build thousands, just like they built thousands of Shermans. He continued, that's their solution to every problem. Build more, build better, build faster. A German general faces a problem and wonders how to overcome it with existing resources. An American general faces a problem and orders a factory to build a solution, and the factory delivers. That's the difference between us. The Chief of Staff asked the question everyone was thinking. Can we win? Rommel didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "We can win battles. We're still winning battles. But wars aren't won by tactical brilliance when your enemy has 10 times your resources. Wars are won by production capacity, industrial mobilization, and the ability to replace losses faster than your enemy can inflict them. The Americans have all three. We have none." On July 17, 1944, Royal Air Force Spitfires strafed Rommel's staff car near Sainte-Foy de Montgomery. He suffered severe head injuries. The wound ended his combat career. 3 months later, implicated in the plot to assassinate Hitler, he was forced to commit suicide. He never learned the full scope of American production. By the end of the war, the United States would produce nearly 50,000 M4 Sherman tanks. 50,000. Germany would produce approximately 6,635 Tigers and Panthers combined. The Americans could lose 10 Shermans for every German heavy tank destroyed and still have crushing numerical superiority. But the numbers weren't even the most important part. The most important part was what the Americans did with those numbers. They didn't just build tanks, they built an entire logistics system designed to keep those tanks running. Every Sherman came with spare parts, maintenance manuals. In English simple enough for civilian conscripts to understand, repair facilities that followed advancing armies. German tankers would abandon perfectly good panzers for lack of spare parts, lack of fuel, lack of ammunition. American tankers would destroy a damaged Sherman and receive a replacement within days. The American system assumed destruction was normal, maintenance was temporary, replacement was guaranteed. It was a fundamentally different way of thinking about war. German military tradition emphasized equipment preservation, resource conservation, individual vehicle maintenance. German tank crews named their tanks, maintained the same vehicle for months, developed intimate knowledge of their machine's quirks and characteristics. American tank crews treated Shermans as disposable. If the transmission failed, request a new tank. If the engine wore out, swap it for a fresh one. If the vehicle took damage, assess whether repair was faster than replacement. The tank wasn't precious. The tank was a tool. Tools wore out. You ordered new tools. That mentality, more than any technical specification, was what defeated Germany. Not because American tanks were better, they weren't. A Panther could destroy a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman couldn't effectively fight back. A Tiger could devastate an entire Sherman platoon if positioned correctly. German engineering was superior, German optics were better, German armor protection was heavier. But when a Panther broke down, which happened frequently because Panthers were mechanical nightmares, German forces might wait days or weeks for repair. When a Sherman broke down, American forces pulled the crew out, pushed the tank aside, and issued a replacement from the hundreds waiting at the depot. German commanders fought with scarcity. They hoarded resources, conserved ammunition, protected valuable equipment, because everything was irreplaceable. American commanders fought with abundance. They expended ammunition freely, used tanks aggressively, took casualties that would have been unthinkable to German planners, because everything was replaceable. The Sherman at Kummersdorf, the one captured at Kasserine Pass, still sits in a warehouse somewhere in Russia. Soviet forces captured it when they overran German proving grounds in 1945. It's been photographed, studied, preserved as a historical artifact. War Daddy 2, the Americans had named it. Painted. White stencils on the hull showing armor thickness for German tests. A relic of the moment when German engineers realized they were facing an enemy that didn't need superior technology because they had superior industry. The reports Patch wrote, the measurements he took, the warnings he sent to Berlin, they're all in archives now. Historians study them, analyze them, write papers about German assessments of Allied equipment. The numbers are all there. American production capacity, German production capacity, the mathematics of industrial warfare. But Rommel understood the implications before any report reached Berlin. He understood it at Kasserine Pass, watching American forces retreat in disorder but leave behind more equipment in one supply dump than German forces captured in a month of operations. He understood it in Tunisia, seeing new American tanks appear daily despite German victories. He understood it in Normandy, watching Allied forces land supplies faster than German artillery could interdict them. He understood that Germany was fighting a war it couldn't win because the enemy had more factories than Germany had soldiers. Because American industrial capacity was so vast that military outcomes were essentially predetermined by production tables written in Detroit boardrooms 2 years earlier. The Sherman wasn't the best tank of World War II. It wasn't the most innovative, the most powerful, the most sophisticated. German Panthers were better combat vehicles. Soviet T-34s were more cost-effective. British Fireflies had superior firepower, but the Sherman won the war in Europe, not through technical excellence, but through simple presence. There were always more Shermans, always another one coming over the hill, always replacements at the depot, always spare parts in the supply chain. German commanders like Rommel, who understood warfare as an art of maneuver and tactical brilliance, found themselves fighting an enemy that had reduced warfare to arithmetic. And in arithmetic, there's no such thing as tactical genius overcoming 10-to-1 numerical inferiority forever. The title of this story suggests Rommel warned Berlin about American production speed. He did, though perhaps not in the dramatic fashion the title implies. His warnings came in intelligence reports, in strategic assessments, in conversations with officers who understood the implications. He didn't need to test the Sherman to understand American production capacity. He just needed to count the tanks. But the testing at Kummersdorf revealed something deeper than Rommel's observations. It revealed that American tanks weren't trying to be better. They were trying to be adequate and abundant. The Sherman's design philosophy wasn't to outfight German panzers. It was to outproduce them so thoroughly that combat outcomes became irrelevant. 48 hours, that's not how long it took to build a Sherman. At peak production, the Chrysler tank arsenal could complete a GZD Sherman every 3 or 4 hours. 48 hours was how long it took the entire American industrial system to produce enough military equipment to outfit a complete armored division. Tanks, trucks, half-tracks, artillery, ammunition, fuel, spare parts, everything. German industry couldn't match that. Soviet industry couldn't match that. Nobody could match that because nobody else had an untouched industrial heartland pumping out material for a war fought thousands of miles away. American factories ran 3 shifts, employed millions of workers, converted automobile production lines to tank production in months, and achieved output that seemed impossible until you toured the facilities and saw the assembly lines running. British observers who visited American factories during the war wrote reports describing production as unbelievable. Soviet officials who came to inspect Lend-Lease operations couldn't comprehend the scale. German intelligence officers who compiled estimates kept revising their numbers upward because each new report made previous estimates look conservative. The Americans weren't hiding their production capacity. They publicized it, turned it into propaganda, used it to intimidate enemies and reassure allies. Life magazine ran photographs of Sherman assembly lines. Newsreels showed tank factories operating around the clock. Government officials gave speeches about American industry winning the war. And they were right. American industry did win the war, or at least made it winnable. The Red Army couldn't have pushed to Berlin without American trucks carrying their supplies. The British couldn't have sustained their army without American equipment supplementing their own production. The Chinese couldn't have resisted without American material support. The war in Europe became a mathematical certainty once American industry mobilized fully. Rommel saw this more clearly than most German commanders. He'd fought the British for 2 years in North Africa, learned to respect their tactical abilities, understood their strategic thinking. He'd fought the Americans for 3 months in Tunisia, seen their initial failures, recognized their potential. He knew both enemies would improve with experience. He knew German advantages in training and equipment would erode over time. He knew the final outcome was determined not by battlefield performance, but by factory output. That knowledge didn't make him defeatist. He fought brilliantly in Normandy, inflicted disproportionate casualties on Allied forces, delayed the breakout from the beaches for weeks longer than Allied planners expected. But he fought without illusions. Every destroyed Sherman would be replaced. Every depleted American unit would be reinforced. Every German loss was permanent. Every Allied loss was temporary. That's what the captured Sherman at Kummersdorf really represented. Not American technical sophistication, not superior engineering, just the simple, brutal reality that America could build tanks faster than Germany could destroy them. And once that reality became clear, the only question was how long Germany could delay the inevitable. The answer, as it turned out, was 2 more years of fighting. 2 years of German soldiers and tankers performing tactical miracles with inadequate resources. 2 years of Allied forces grinding forward with overwhelming material superiority. 2 years until the factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh and Schenectady produced so much equipment that German resistance collapsed under the sheer weight of American industrial output. Rommel didn't live to see the final defeat, but he'd predicted it accurately. Not because he was pessimistic, not because he underestimated German fighting ability, but because he understood mathematics. And the mathematics, once American industry fully mobilized, were inescapable. The Sherman tanks that rolled into Germany in 1945, crushing the last resistance, weren't the same Shermans Rommel had encountered at Kasserine Pass. They were improved models, upgunned with 76mm cannons, equipped with better ammunition, crewed by veterans who'd learned hard lessons in combat. But they still embodied the same philosophy. Adequate equipment, massive quantities, guaranteed replacement. And that philosophy, more than any single weapon or technology, won the war. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.